All right, so part two. Did you drop down into your heart space? Because I did. I took a moment to ground my energy really, really well before I talk about this because I know that it's going to touch on some things that hurt. Um, so the first thing that Spirit wants me to focus in on and kind of feeling things out is the subject of when they are not ready. And they're in this moment of kind of wavering back and forth on whether or not they should really involve you in their life or not, because that's ultimately what it comes down to on a 3D level. That's the space that they fall into, the person that is less ascended and not really knowing what the hell is going on. And when I say that, that I was totally tapping into that energy, like I don't know what the hell is going on. I don't understand this. It doesn't align with my entire life experience. I don't know what's happening to me. Um, I feel connected to this person, but I don't know who the hell they are, like what I'm experiencing. And what Spirit wants to say as far as all of those feelings is that the ego self is being cracked. And what's the job of the ego? To protect us. The ego is meant to protect us. It's to keep us safe. And so when anything is outside of our understanding, it's very natural for human beings to lie to themselves. I mean, if we want to put it very bluntly, to find excuses, to repaint or reframe a situation, even if that reframing is very different from what reality is. It's what humans have had to do over the eons to keep themselves mentally together to get through something. And a lot of times what we're seeing, or what I'm seeing in my work, is a lot of the less ascended, confused folks who are on the precipice of just being broken open by a connection that they're experiencing. They go into fight or flight. They literally have a traumatic reaction. And I think that's very important, specifically for divine feminines to understand, because it's mostly the divine feminines that are experiencing that. Not always. It's not a universal blanket statement, but quite often that's what I'm seeing. And that's the general understanding. So it creates this fight or flight moment. And when you are about to take a step on a path that is completely dark and you've walked a little bit and you can no longer see the familiar people behind you and you can no longer hear the voices that you're so used to hearing and the music that you hear every day, go with me, like walk with me here. give me some time to work this out, because I swear there's a point to this. And that path is getting darker and darker. You can't see ahead of yourself anymore. And that is the ascension path. You're leaving things behind that are so familiar that you've known your entire life, that society has related to you as normal, that you've experienced in your family life, what you've come to understand as what life is and who you are as a person. But then there's this person that's having you question all of that to a degree. And maybe there's parts where you can align with some of what's being related and experienced, but we are not ready to dive into the fucking deep end here. Like, I am not ready for this, is what I hear. And that is so common. Because when you're on a path and it's unfamiliar to you and there's nothing but darkness up ahead and you're being asked basically to keep walking, even though you can no longer hear anything, you can't see anything, there's nobody around. It's like sensory deprivation when you are walking further on the ascension path. It literally feels like sensory deprivation because you are a fish out of water. And we all go through those times. And a lot of times when you meet that person that makes you question all those things, you get plunged into a dark night of the soul. Things start falling away. Things start crumbling. The life that you've had that has felt maybe comfortable enough, but not entirely comfortable, is starting to become less and less stable. And you're starting to feel less and less comfortable and less stable within it. That's scary as fuck. That is so scary. And I've been there. Back in 2011, my life completely fell apart. And I was questioning everything about my identity and who I was. Everything that I thought that I was had just been shredded. I lost everything but my son. I lost everything. And I even had a massive near-death experience. I almost died. And I don't mean it was like a brief accident and I was okay. I mean, I nearly literally died and spent weeks in the hospital and had to have transfusions and was down for a while. And it was the closest that I have ever been to death in my life. And I've had a few near-death experiences, and I know that's been part of my journey and training. But I knew that fear. I was in such a state that everything was gone. Everything that I knew was gone. There was no comfort around me. I just isolated, and my gifts were getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's what this journey brings forward. That's what that person and that connection brings forward for these people who are just trying to figure out what the hell is happening to them. And I will say most of the people that are on that journey are men, the ones that are experiencing this, like this cracking open, and they're very fearful. And our society does not support our men. And I feel really poorly for this in the way that men are done such a disservice, because we do not support them in being themselves and being emotional and having feelings and being able to express those feelings. It's always buck up, be a man, don't inconvenience anybody by not being uber masculine. And there is a lot of pressure to be a certain way and act a certain way to fit into the herd. And it's just, I can appreciate that as men, that would be really, really fucking hard. And we have our own challenges as women, but that's such a huge disservice that we do to men, especially when they're young, and we tell them, don't cry. You're not allowed to cry. You're not allowed to have any kind of authentic expression. And we rob them of their voice in that way, and we rob them of their authenticity in that way. And so when they're on this journey and they meet someone that just starts to kind of crack that open, the shell that men have to adapt, or I should say the divine masculine, because yes, it largely pertains to a gender, but not always. We have women that are divine masculines and men that are divine feminines. And any gender identification that can identify as either divine masculine or divine feminine. This is not a blanket one size fits all deal here, guys. Every journey is unique. But when our society has forced you to create a shell around yourself and to act a certain way and be a certain way, especially if you happen to be empathic and intuitive like these individuals are, and you're being asked to take off that armor, and like there's little cracks beginning to form and lights starting to get in, and when that armor has kept you safe and now you're being challenged to get rid of it, and you're experiencing different things that feel so foreign, and there's an uptick in huge emotions, and there's so many ups and downs, and the cracking open of the ego is unbelievably threatened and scared. And this is where we get into what people refer to as the runner-chaser dynamic. Oh man, has that been overused. But on this journey, when you find that there is such a dynamic that doesn't involve a whole lot of healthy exchange or reciprocity, and you can't feel safe with that person, like emotionally safe or even sometimes physically safe, which if that's the case, you absolutely need to go. But it does require, even on this journey, discernment. It really does. I touched upon this concept in an earlier video in which I said, when love is no longer being served at the table, if love hasn't been served at the table, if kindness and compassion, communication, honesty, if none of that is being served at the table or in tiny amounts, you need to get up from the table. I don't care who it is, because this journey that I'm referring to is all about you loving you and finding your own authenticity, standing up for yourself and healing your own wounds, because that person is reflecting to you what you need to see. And a lot of times on this journey, I find that people can tend to project a lot and push things on the other person and say, well, if they would only hurry up, if they would only figure this out, if they would only do this, we'd have no problems. No, that's not true. That's not true. Because you are mirrors to each other, you're going to push each other's buttons and strike the fear of God into each other. You're going to be triggered because there's something in you that is being tripped up. And we need to look at that. Do you have abandonment issues, rejection issues? Have you gone through trauma? Have you learned in your life that you can't trust people or that you can't trust yourself? Have you learned that you can't speak your truth? Have you learned that you have to pretend to be somebody else rather than be yourself? Are you afraid to let people love you? Are you dissociating from your life and the things that you don't want to deal with instead of actually dealing with them? And so on and so forth. So when you have to leave this dynamic, there are several steps to do that. Okay? Because if this is not, and again, I don't care who they are, if there's no reciprocity, if there's a ton of toxicity, if this is unhealthy for you, and you're going to know whether or not it is, and it's your choice to really engage in that. The steps to take are, number one, make the decision. Get really honest. Pull out a piece of paper. Divide that paper in half. On the left side, write down the things that are unhealthy and hurting. All the examples that you can think of, okay? Of what's happened, what's been happening, what's not being met. All the different examples of the toxicity. On the right side, list the good things. Look at them honestly and weigh them out. Ask yourself if there is reciprocity, if you feel safe, or if you're constantly feeling unstable, like the ground is constantly changing underneath you or moving underneath you. That's a question to ask. And once you make the decision, I'm going to tell you this. It takes 3 weeks for the brain to adjust to a new routine. And that's going to be part of what you need to adjust to. Because when you become fixated on a person or you have developed a routine with them, the brain doesn't like change. That's the ego trying to protect itself again. So you're going to need to give yourself 21 days to commit to sticking to that decision. And when you get to that 21 days, give yourself another 21 days. Make it very technical. Do not contact that person, okay? Step back. Give yourself 21 days. When you hit that 21 days, reward yourself with something that you want. Give yourself a little bit of a reward system here because the brain loves that. You are working against your ego. You're working against your brain, which is trying to protect you. So it's going to fight you every step of the way. So you're going to want to set up a reward system because the brain really responds to that. But make sure that those things are healthy. Try to get plenty of sleep. Eat well. Things that nourish your body. Spend some time sifting through your feelings. Journal. Talk to somebody that will actually listen. Get a therapist. Everybody needs a therapist. Therapist needs therapists. Like life is hard. So it's really good to have a third party that you can talk to. And line up joy every single step of the way. Also, take time to acknowledge what you fear because fear is a huge part of detaching. A huge, huge part of it. And that's often what keeps people stuck. They'll make steps to step forward and then they go slingshotting back in the other direction. And then before you know it, they're stuck right in the back. They're back right in the same cycle again and dealing with all the same stuff, incurring more cuts and not getting anywhere. And trying to find a new project or goal that you can pour yourself into because you shouldn't. I'm going to say you will not benefit from fixating on the past or that person. It's like a drug. Your brain has literally adhered to that person so often in this dynamic as if it is a drug. And your brain gets hooked on dopamine and serotonin, all these hormones that create a high, these chemicals in the brain. It is, this is happening on a scientific, physiological level too, a biological level. And we need to acknowledge that as well in this process. So pour yourself into a goal, set up a reward system for every milestone that you hit and keep going. Also acknowledge your emotions, feel them through, sift them through. Start from there and keep recycling. Keep recycling that. Start an exercise routine, get plenty of movement, anything that nourishes your body, and talk with spirit. I have meetings every single week with spirit, and I talk out loud to my spirit guides. And yes, I hear them and I see them and we have an exchange. But the more that you do that, the more they're going to trust you, like any relationship, and you're going to have the same. I tell my spirit guides everything. And I've been through this walk and it was hard. But once you commit to it, it does get easier over time. But I also want to say, give yourself plenty of time. Don't time this or think I'm pathetic because I'm still mourning or grieving. It's a grieving process, 100%. But allow yourself all of the time that you need without judging it, okay? But just keep recycling those different ways of stepping and you're going to be okay, all right? There's another part to that and we'll get into that in the next video. So I love you, okay? We'll go into the next part with this next